want to get obviously to what's going on in Michigan and Michigan and Wisconsin. We spoke to Ari Berman earlier in the week, and things have simply progressed on the same trajectory. But we'll get to that in a moment. But let's talk about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, because this was, up until about 2 years ago, considered by many to be one of the most successful agencies, I don't know if in the history of the U.S. government, but certainly in modern times, and because of the way that it was financed, right? And personnel. Tell us why.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the financing, and the point of that is that it was not financed through congressional appropriations, so you couldn't have the money spigot turned off. It was funded through the Federal Reserve, which guaranteed its resources. I think more so the reason that CFPB has been successful is because of sort of the way the agency was imagined. This is an agency with a mission that is entirely and singularly to protect consumers. Previously, these laws that it has jurisdiction and oversight over were put into agencies that had other missions, safety and soundness of the banks, things like that. And they were sort of at cross purposes with this mission of, making sure consumers are getting a fair shake on these very important financial transactions.
It's probably designed that way on some level, right?
Absolutely.
It's sort of like a mitigating, like a built-in,
right?
Like the critique is built into the into the product.
And so you're weighing those two missions, and usually it comes out on the side of the group with the most money and the most power and influence. This was distributed differently and was also staffed differently. I mean, as you recall, for the first year, Elizabeth Warren was the person who stood up this agency, and she built the organizational chart. She created the ways in which the priorities were made for this agency. She staffed the agency at the very beginning. A lot of those people were still there through the first term of Richard Cordray, who was sort of the hand-picked director. And so all of those things, I think, came together. It was seen as a new agency. It was vibrant. It brought people in who had a public service mission. So there were a lot of reasons why it was set up for success. And it was successful to a degree. I mean, I don't want to overstate it. There were some things I think that CFPB did where they kind of kept their powder dry, pulled their punches a little bit in rulemaking. But generally a successful agency until last Thanksgiving when Richard Cordray left to unsuccessfully run for governor of Ohio. And Mick Mulvaney, who was moonlighting, he was the he was the White House budget director, who would come in 3 days a week to screw up the CFPB.
Much easier when you're screwing something up. It's much easier to
do
be
a short timer.
3 days a week.
You can be like a 9 to 3 banker.
Yeah, exactly.
Go out on the golf course after you destroy this agency.
Steal.
On some level, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but on some level, that is the entire sort of conservative project, right? And to get into government, destroy it, and it's so hard to be incompetent at being incompetent. If you're
not quite though, because I've actually heard from some people that Mulvaney. I mean, we talk about Kathy Kraninger. She's the woman who was confirmed yesterday, and how she has no consumer protection experience whatsoever. And that's absolutely true. But it's not like Mulvaney did, right? I mean, he was a congressman. He had no executive agency experience before this. He was a budget director. That's a very different thing than consumer financial protection. I'm not sure he was even on the Financial Services Committee in Congress. He was certainly a critic of CFPB, but that was mainly because of who was coming into his office. So he actually did not know the mechanisms by which he could, particularly on rulemaking, how he could undo those rules. So he would say to people in the office, "Hey, I want to get rid of this payday rule," and they'd be like, "Yeah, all right," and then they just kind of wouldn't do it.
Right.
So on rulemaking, he has not been quite as successful. Where Mulvaney was very successful is in enforcement.
Right.
And, the Washington Post this week put out a pretty long article showing that enforcement was down 75%. It took several months for any enforcement actions to be brought by the agency. There's this thing that the Washington Post attributed to people at the agency, but I wrote it 6 months earlier, called the Mulvaney discount. And the Mulvaney discount is these various enforcement actions where there would just be a reduction in the penalty.
That's the easiest thing to do, right? You get
exactly.
It comes on your desk, and it's like sign off on this $300 million penalty, and you go, you know what? I'm gonna drop this down to 25.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we call this.
And that's exactly what was done. On up till today, I
was there an algorithm, or was it just he just picked a number he liked?
Literally
90% reduction.
Literally, they would say in the enforcement documents that, initially we wanted $6 million, but we don't feel like this company that ripped off people has the ability to pay that. So we're going to drop it to $200,000. I mean, that's almost verbatim in some of these documents. Going on up to yesterday, the day that Kraninger gets confirmed, CFPB did an enforcement action against State Farm Bank, the insurance company, but they also have a bank. And it was about credit reporting errors. They would report to credit reporting agencies incorrect information about customers.
Well, that's not a big deal for you to get a reduced credit score.
Right.
So much for the house or the car that you wanted, or the loan to help your kid go to school, or whatever it is.
So they reported this incorrect information, never corrected it. We're delayed in actually getting that information out and finally reversing it. Ruined credit scores, and the enforcement action. And I'm not being hyperbolic. This was the enforcement action. Promise not to do it again. It was $0.
Do they have to do that in writing, or they just
in writing?
Compliance.
There's compliance around not doing it again. $0 in fines. $0 in restitution to these people who had their credit scores ruined.
Wow.
And that was the enforcement. So, there's a sense that, Kraninger's coming in, she has no experience, she's just going to ruin the agency. Ruin it from what? I mean, right. Mulvaney has already really
they do
done
seem
the
to
deed.
have a scheme to do this. But let me just also interject. From your perspective, right, there's no punishment for that agency. But I think libertarian philosophy tells us that, of course, consumers will stop going to that agency because they did this,
to
and
State
they'll
Farm
go
Bank.
out of State Farm Bank. They will go out of business now.
Right. So you'll never see State Farm commercials anymore.
Right. State Farm Bank will go out of business because why would people, why would anybody use them if they were doing that?
It's the discipline of the market is what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
I should just add, I'm being facetious. There was a half dozen people out there.
So Kraninger gets confirmed. Yes, she obviously
thanks to Susan Collins,
woefully unqualified. A 50-49 decision. So all Democrats voted against this, and I guess Tom Tillis was absent yesterday for some reason or another, which means it was 50-49. So any one of the Republicans could have voted the other way, and she would not have
because
been
even
confirmed.
if Mike Pence came down to vote, right?
50-49, it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, if Tillis is gone.
Oh, he's got to break a tie. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if it was 49-50,
right,
nomination fails. Now, there is a sense that it's not necessarily a good thing that Kraninger has been confirmed, but consider the alternative. So Mulvaney's there in an interim capacity. This is a 5-year term, and it's independent of who is in the White House. So Kraninger is confirmed today, December 2018. It has a 5-year term, will be there till December 2023, which means regardless of whoever becomes president in 2020.
Oh, that's so depressing.
Kraninger is allowed to be there. Now she's there is a possibility to do a for-cause removal of the CFPB directors.
Like you're
obviously
not doing your job?
Obviously never been done before.
Right.
Because it's a new agency, but that's an option. If you have a President Warren, maybe she tries to do something like that. But it's a little dicey. I mean, you don't know if that's going to happen. So,
but at the very least,
but
President Democrat who might win in 2020 will have the opportunity to appoint someone. As opposed to if this had gone 5 years.
But think about the alternative. So think about what if the courts decide, well, no, you can't. This isn't a cause. You can't fire them. So right now, Kraninger's there till December 2023. If they voted her down and Mulvaney just stays there and does the lack of enforcement he's doing, and they don't fill it until the end of Trump's turn, then it's it's another couple years out.
Right.
So there was a school of thought that, let's confirm this person as quick as we can to get her out of there.
Right. It almost would have been better to do this a year ago because you just want to get it over as quickly as possible instead of.
That's a school of thought, but you can see it both ways.
Okay. Let's just, before we move on to a different topic, Mick Mulvaney is saying that according to the charter, essentially, of this agency. That its name is not really the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is the Bureau of Consumer
Financial Protection. Yes.
Now, this
True
is
story.
This is nuts. So he wants to change it to reflect the real name, which is going to require all of these companies, financial entities that file with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to refile with the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection.
Right.
And at a cost of somewhere around $300 million.
There was, just to be clear, there was a CFPB report that was put out to say what is the effect of the name change, both on the agency, which obviously has lots of forms and things, and moving the B number from the beginning to the end. What's amazing about this is that he's literally taking consumers and not putting them first. I mean, that's literally what he's doing by doing that. So they did this report to show, how much is this going to cost the agency, and then how much is it going to cost the firms who then have to do all these changes in their databases, changes in their compliance forms, and things like that. And yes, what they showed is that it would cost the agency $19 million just to change the name, and it would cost regulated firms, regulated by the agency, up to $300 million.
And the purpose of this is to show how bad this agency is, right? Like that it's making people, it's causing unnecessary waste.
Yes, there's a sense that that's the point. Like the point is to cost $300 million to show how silly it is. But there's also just this bizarre, actually what I found is that they've been naming it wrong. These stupid liberals have named it wrong this entire time.
It's just bizarre.
Elizabeth Warren's bad at naming things.
But I mean, I think the idea is...
By the way, Mick Mulvaney Mick is not his name. Mick is a nickname. His name is John Michael Mulvaney, and he's saying, this is ridiculous that we're not using the statutory real name of the Consumer Financial Protection.
But it's not, he's not doing this out of some type of OCD. He's doing this because they want to further create animosity towards the agency and create an argument that this is an agency that's out of control and it's bad, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is sort of it seems to me, equivalent to the way that a Republican Congress deals with the postal office, right? It's like, you have no control over what you're doing. We're going to impose upon you certain obligations. You're going to have to pay out. You're going to have to fully fund your pensions system and your healthcare system for a 75-year horizon to pay for postal workers' retirement for postal workers who aren't even born yet.
Right.
It has to be fully paid.
Right.
There's no other entity, maybe in the world, that imposes that requirement on themselves or is imposed on that. Right. And it doesn't give the Postal Service an ability to deal with it. It's just a way to inhibit and kneecap them.
There's a somewhat alternate point in that Mulvaney's argument has been that CFPB is out of control. They have gone well beyond their statutory objectives. Nobody's reading the statutory language except me, John Michael Mulvaney, and they have overreached beyond the legislative intent. So what he's really saying is, you have so ignored the legislative intent of this agency that you're not even naming it right. See here in this language that you've never read that it's wrong. The irony is that the Dodd-Frank Act refers to the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection and also refers to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in different parts of the statute.
Calls them the same thing
so there's
differently.
CFPB sometimes, and there's BCFP as well. So, under Mulvaney's standard, he could not, for example, the agency is called CFPB in the context of putting the director on the board of the FDIC. So under what Mulvaney's saying, if it's called the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, he couldn't be on the FDIC board, right? So
because if you're going to be that literal.
right,
Okay.
exactly.
All right, well, let's talk about